For a pair of international criminals, the effort to pocket millions in laundered British pounds started years before COVID-19. Still, the global health crisis gave them new opportunities to pull off their daring series of scams. Russian native Artem Turchin and Davis Grokiatskij of Lithuania were on the radar of UK investigators as far back as 2017, and a continuing criminal probe revealed the extent of a scheme that netted them roughly £70 million in total. The investigation spanned 4 years and involved officials from the Metro Police and National Crime Agency. It all started when officers spotted a man dropping off a large sum of money in a car parked outside a house they were watching. Police believe the house was a front for a London-based money counting operation. The suspect was later identified as Oriel Zilfi, and he was in the sights of authorities again just 1 month later. At that time, police say he received a payment of £40,000 from Turchin. Both men were arrested, convicted, and sentenced to a year behind bars after the investigation. Upon searching Zilfi's residence, police reportedly found evidence of a scheme to launder roughly £7 million over 4 months. More evidence surfaced that implicated Zilfi, Turchin, and others in a massive criminal scheme. After uncovering evidence of a much larger illegal enterprise, police soon began zeroing in on Grokiatskij, who lived in the same building as Turchin. An Audi, the same car in which Zilfi left a bag of cash, was a central component of the case against the scammers. Authorities determined that it had been used to deliver a staggering sum of money to different entities throughout a 7-month period in which Turchin and Grokiatskij were neighbors. That money was reportedly funneled through shell companies set up by the pair and was laundered through numerous international transactions. Deposits regularly traveled through Germany, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, the Czech Republic, and Singapore before finally ending up in the criminals' pockets. Both men were arrested in 2018, and police began sorting through the mountain of evidence they'd collected. After combing through the contents of a computer, an encrypted cell phone, handwritten receipts, and bank transactions, authorities estimated that the group was responsible for laundering the equivalent $50 million. Almost half of that was transferred via cash deposits. Turchin and Grokiatskij were released from prison on bail as they awaited trial in the case. The court's supposed restraints didn't stop them from returning to their old ways, though. The pair hatched another plan while facing charges related to the massive money laundering scheme. They decided to target Britain's Bounce Back program, which was established to provide loans to companies struggling to make it through the pandemic and widespread lockdowns. Authorities say the two men raked in over $13 million in payouts for falsified loan applications through this plan. Investigators quickly caught on to their scheme and arrested them in late 2020. After reviewing the latest evidence in the continuing case against them, authorities determined that Turchin and Grokiatskij laundered roughly $45 million starting in mid-2018. As for the bounce-back loans, police say the pair submitted a series of claims for £50,000 loans and received £10 million altogether. Reports indicate a single bank was responsible for providing more than £3 million of that sum. Much like in the United States and elsewhere around the world, the UK established its bounce back program and the coronavirus business interruption loan to provide cash assistance to struggling businesses throughout the pandemic-related shutdowns. The British government served as an underwriter for 80% of the CBIL program and 100% of the bounce back loans. Also, like similar initiatives in other countries, scammers saw these British assistance programs as easy targets. In fact, the government spent £100 million and assigned about 1,000 investigators to a specialized task force designed to uncover and expose the amount of fraud involving these programs. As it turned out, the scams perpetrated by Turchin and Grokiatskij represented just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators determined that billions of pounds were misappropriated or otherwise stolen through similar types of fraud. An extensive audit found that there weren't enough safeguards against misuse of the funding, and that the government dragged its feet when conducting reviews of suspicious applications. Officials must have known that fraud was a real concern, especially when hundreds of millions in free money was involved. Many of them determined that a certain level of theft was a price they'd have to pay for delivering money to struggling people during the pandemic's peak. The review confirmed that loans were being granted for at least $1 month before authorities devised a method for determining whether single companies were applying for multiple loans. By the time they developed the system, more than 60% of all the loans funded by these programs were gone. In late 2020, the government started to get a bit more serious about preventing fraud, but plenty of damage had already been done. One early estimate indicated that 7.5% of all loans approved might have been fraudulent. That number grew dramatically when the task force released its investigative report, finding that as much as 11% of the cash paid out through these government loans went to scammers. In real terms, that makes this a widespread scheme that cost taxpayers nearly £5 billion. With the economy forced to remain closed for weeks, the United Kingdom's government prioritized quick action over fiscal accountability. For some, the money didn't come through as quickly as some small business owners might have preferred. Meanwhile, plenty of people received loans they didn't deserve. The Bounce Back Loan Program was introduced after the CBILS to streamline the process and get money to struggling business owners as quickly as possible. The relief programs handed out a combined £80 billion in loans between March 2020 and June 2021. Bounce Back accounted for the largest number of those loans, with £47 billion sent out to about 1.6 million individuals, sometimes within a day of filing the application. Most financial institutions perform extensive reviews to determine the likelihood that an applicant can repay a loan. However, when the government rolled out the Bounce Back initiative, officials mandated that banks forego such efforts. One banking executive recalled that the banks were prohibited from performing credit checks in the program's early days. Most experts agreed that getting money out to businesses as quickly as possible via the British banking system. However, in the aftermath, taxpayers were on the hook for billions of pounds sent out in fraudulent loans. Applicants were given a list of requirements for receiving a guaranteed loan. Specifically, they had to affirm that the pandemic negatively impacted their businesses. Of course, many fraudsters simply lied on the forms with no intention of repaying the loan. Banks were expected to do their best to reclaim the money, but most of those efforts fell flat. That means the government passed off its losses to the British citizenry. One banking insider explained why many in the industry felt that they've done what they were asked to do and decided to just drop the pursuit of many fraudulent claims. It's not surprising that banks aren't eager to exert money and other resources to track down borrowers who are likely perpetrating a fraudulent scheme. After all, the government will reimburse these institutions whether or not the loan is paid. Regulators require that banks show that they've made some effort to collect on the loans, though it's clear that many of them are content to do the bare minimum while taking comfort in the knowledge that they won't lose any money. Many banking executives attempted to warn the government of the inherent vulnerabilities in each of these programs. 2 days before the first loan applications were accepted, the ex-head of the British Business Bank sent a letter to the nation's business secretary to sound the alarms about abuse by individuals and by participants in organized crime. Just weeks later, 3 anti-corruption organizations joined forces to send their own warning. They requested that those who receive funds through the program be made public. That plea fell on deaf ears within the British government. Since the loans lacked the transparency that many experts said would be necessary to combat fraud, many details remain cloaked in mystery. Subsequent reviews found that some of the money was gambled away or traded for foreign currency, making it unlikely that the government would ever recover its losses. Much of the stolen cash went to pay for personal expenses and lavish purchases by the scammers behind various fraudulent schemes. When investigators separated the loans based on the banks that issued them, they found a troubling trend. Some institutions appeared to do their due diligence and signaled potentially fraudulent loan applications. However, a handful of banks were responsible for approving the lion's share of loans that ended up going to scammers. One report determined that just 3 banks were behind a whopping 87% of loans paid out to companies that had already gone out of business. Furthermore, 2 banks handled more than 8 in 10 loans for companies that didn't even exist before the outbreak of COVID-19. It's not entirely clear what the British government plans to do in its effort to recover the lost money, though there are some signs that regulators are working on methods to address fraud in the future. For example, authorities will now perform a review on any business that goes out of business to determine if any unpaid loans were taken out on its behalf. The Treasury Bureau approved £32 million in additional funding for anti-fraud operations, but some government officials are concerned that it won't be enough. With such an enormous amount of money missing, there's a common perception that authorities are offering too little, too late. A representative from the Treasury Department attempted to quench concerns, insisting that that any amount of fraud is totally unacceptable, asserting that the agency is taking action on multiple fronts to crack down on anyone who has sought to exploit our schemes, bring them to justice. Although they were clearly not alone in perpetrating fraud against the UK government, Turgeon and Grokiatskij could be seen as the poster children for such financial crimes. Their illegal enterprise was responsible for laundering a staggering amount of cash for other criminals around the world. Police say £10 million came from loans obtained through the pandemic relief program. Upon conviction, they were both sentenced to what's believed to be the longest prison terms ever handed down in the United Kingdom for charges related to money laundering. While they're each looking at 33 years behind bars, their story only highlights a problem plaguing governments in COVID's wake. One representative from an anti-corruption watchdog group accused the United Kingdom of failing to take fraud and other white-collar crimes seriously. A decades-long prison sentence for Turgeon and Grokiatskij is a step in the right direction, but critics say there's plenty more hard work to do. Her husband ran one of the biggest Ponzi scams ever, and she helped him hide the money. And this couple went on the run after they were discovered scamming over $30 million from their customers. Let's get right to it. Number 4. Bullion Run. Bernard Ross Hansen, former president and CEO of Northwest Territorial Mint, a now bankrupt company dealing in precious metals, and his girlfriend, Diane Renee Erdman, scammed 3,000 customers of over $30 million. Couples share time, love, and affection, but this couple shares one extra sentiment: scamming. Bernard's company dealt in manufacturing medallions and other awards, as well as bullion business that involved selling, buying, exchanging, storing, and leasing gold, silver, and other precious metals. Bernard and Diane defrauded their customers in different ways. They lied about shipping times for bullion. They used their customers' money to expand their business to different states and take care of their personal expenses. Like a Ponzi scheme, their lies and customers kept building up, and the company kept sinking under the weight of unfulfilled orders. The couple used new customer money to pay off older customers and tried to keep everyone happy while making sure their pockets were heavily lined with cash. Of the almost 3,000 customers they had, 2,500 of them paid for orders or made bullion sales or exchanges that were either never fulfilled or never refunded. Bernard and Diane made over $25 million from this. Bernard and Diane also ran a storage business. Customers would pay the couple thousands of dollars to store their precious metals securely, and they would siphon the assets for their personal use. In 2016, investigators took inventory of the company's vaults and found nearly $5 million worth of precious metals belonging to over 50 customers was missing. Rather than keep customers' assets safe, Bernard turned the vault into a company piggy bank. He used the storage as his own, sometimes going as far as melting down customers' property to make something else and ship it off to another client. In 2016, the company declared bankruptcy. The victims of this elaborate Ponzi scheme weren't wealthy multimillionaires. They were ordinary people with plans and dreams. People who look forward to their retirement, who set up college funds for their kids, and who inherited a modest amount of wealth from their relatives. The scam took everything from these people and left them with no option but to work harder, longer, and in deep stress to get their lives back on track. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Bernard of 14 federal felony counts of mail and wire fraud. Each charge carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. The panel also convicted Diane, who doubled as Bernard's vault manager, of 13 felony counts. They were sentenced to 11 years and 5 years in prison, respectively. Just before their sentencing date, the couple attempted to flee. They were on the run for 11 days before the FBI caught them in Port Hadlock, Washington. When police found them, they had 3 loaded guns behind the car's driver's seat. Because they attempted to escape justice, the prosecutors increased the requested prison sentence for the couple. They also had to pay over $60 million in restitution. Number 3. Sing Sing. For over 6 years, Chander Singh and 4 Century 21 All-Stars 100 employees scammed their clients through investments that promised double-digit returns. Interestingly, these so-called employees also happen to be his parents, brother, and a close family friend who coincidentally bears the same surname, Singh. Chander Singh is a lawyer from Emerson who owns a distressed North Jersey real estate investment firm called SC Capital Investors LLC. He conspired with his parents, Saru Paul Singh and Savitri Joyce Singh, his brother Subhas Brian Singh, and their family friend Chadikra Basil Singh, all of whom work as real estate agents. Chadikra was a licensed real estate agent and the director of the Eastern Persian Board of Realtors, a panel that oversees ethical complaints related to real estate. Since at least 2014, the 5 of them used Chander's company to gain access to people and convince them to invest in his Ponzi scheme by promising them astronomical returns. Their scheme went well until disgruntled investors started reporting them to the police for owing them money from various related real estate deals. After duping investors, Chander would attempt to cover his tracks by running the money through a network of banks. He often made deposits of less than $10,000 to avoid cash transaction reports. On November 10, 2020, the 5 of them were arrested and remanded at the Bergen County Jail pending their court appearances. In January 2020, Chander left New Jersey and fled to his relatives in Trinidad and Guyana, and even made inquiries about becoming an attorney in the West Indies while leaving his New Jersey investors with no clue about where their money was. He appeared to be on the road to starting a new life in South America. The investors would later complain that Chander was funneling money in and out of his attorney trust fund without paying his debts. Chander's lawyer claimed he didn't attempt to flee to escape justice, but left the country because he needed to get away for his mental health. Upon investigation, Chander's family revealed that he returned home in October 2020, but planned to flee to Guyana in January 2021. But before escaping, police arrested him at his parents' house. Chander was charged with money laundering, theft by deception, forgery, and records tampering, while the entire group was also accused of conspiracy-related offenses. If convicted on all charges, he faces a maximum of 20 years in prison. Number 2. Madoff Jr.'s. Scott Rothstein ran a Bernie Madoff-style Ponzi scheme for years that earned him $1.2 billion. With this fortune cooling in his account, he would live a lavish lifestyle featuring politics, luxurious yachts, sports cars, women, and lots of gold. Scott grew up in a blue-collar community in the Bronx. Despite his humble background, he would build a successful career as a lawyer specializing in gender discrimination suits, eventually setting up his law firm, Rothstein Rosenfeld Alder. In its prime, the firm had over 70 lawyers on its payroll. Today, it no longer exists. Through his law firm, Scott got access to potential victims who he tried to convince to part with their money by selling shares in fake lawsuit settlement. He promised his investors they would reap the rewards when the cases were settled, and further perpetrated the scam by creating false bank documents and phony settlement agreements. Scott's wife, Kim, helped him keep their stolen money from his investors. As the authorities cracked the whip on her husband's organization, she tried to conceal and sell over $1 million worth of jewelry that investigators wanted to seize as part of the investigation. When the house of cards they had built came crashing down, Kim pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received a sentence of 18 months in prison. She filed a divorce subsequently. A typical Scott Rothstein scam started from a private elevator disguised as an ordinary door. He would take the potential victim up to his office, where he would then begin to lay out the plan. He had secured a lucrative pre-litigation settlement from a client's former employer, and the client needed money up front to foot the legal fees, so the investor could purchase the settlement and reap the rewards when the case is settled. To ensure secrecy, Scott would warn the client not to disclose the details of the deal because the settling company could get wind of it and go to court to stop the payments. Scott sometimes went as far as scamming actual clients that hired his firm to file a lawsuit. Once, when he lost the suit and his clients had to pay $500,000 in reparations, he created fraudulent court papers that made his clients pay $57 million to him. Scott lived a life gilded with comfort of the flashy sort. His wardrobe featured $6,000 suits and over 200 luxury timepieces. He spent over $1 million on his wedding at the Versace mansion and another $3.2 million on a pair of Bugatti sports cars that sat beside other luxurious vehicles in his vast garage. He had at least 4 houses and a fleet of boats. Where over-the-top luxury was concerned, Scott missed no tricks, including his and hers golden toilets in his luxury estates. Scott also spent about $50,000 to $60,000 monthly on female companionships, paying their rent, sending them to law school, and financing their international trips. He had an endless supply of women, including his second wife, Kim. Scott was always thrilled to spend his illegal wealth in tilting political support towards his direction. He was a major figure in the South Florida social and political scene, with the hefty contributions he often made to political causes. He donated $96,000 to Republican Republican Governor Charlie Crist's campaigning for the U.S. Senate and dropped another $6,000 for Democrat Alex Sink's gubernatorial campaign. Outside politics, Scott donated to charitable organizations and hospitals as well. $800,000 to Joe DiMaggio Children's and $1 million to Holy Cross. Find out more about Scott Rothstein's giant scam by clicking here. Number 1. Grandfathered in. In this $1.5 billion Ponzi scheme, Edwin Fujinaga, president and CEO of Las Vegas-based MRI International, built 10,000 Japanese investors of their life savings. He used the money to fund his luxurious lifestyle, hopping from yacht to yacht and buying luxury cars. Edwin didn't run his Ponzi scheme alone. He had help from Junzo Suzuki, MRI's executive vice president for the Asia-Pacific region, and Paul Suzuki, the general manager of its Japanese operations. In the early years of Edwin's scheme, Junzo and Paul weren't aware of what was happening in the organization. It wasn't until the scheme was on its last legs that they were brought up to speed. Edwin targeted 10,000 Japanese investors in his large-scale fraud. He claimed he could pay interest by buying U.S. medical debt cheaply and then getting full reimbursement from insurance companies. These people would part with their money, but Edwin and his co-conspirators diverted the funds. Some of the clients lost their life savings to MRI International. In typical Ponzi style, they used some new investments to pay back prior investors. Edwin spent a chunk of it on luxury cars, private jets, credit card bills, alimony, child support, a $2.3 million Las Vegas golf course mansion, and homes in Hawaii and Beverly Hills, California. Edwin's wife, June, had to give up the $2.4 million she received from him while he ran the fraud. The court decided she had no legitimate claim to the money, whether or not she knew anything about Edwin's illegal business. She had earlier tried to hide the money by buying 2 condominiums at the MGM Grand Towers in Las Vegas and transferring them to the Yunjo Trust about 3 weeks after the SEC sued her husband. She even produced W-2 forms to show that she had earned the money, but she still had to refund it. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Edwin on 20 counts of fraud and money laundering. The 50-year sentence he subsequently received will keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. According to Chief U.S. District Judge Gloria Navarro, the heavy sentence was befitting of a criminal who ran the nation's largest ever fraud schemes. Junzo and Paul Suzuki also faced wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering charges. After stealing people's life savings, Edwin's excuse was that he had simply lost control of the situation at MRI International. He also had to pay nearly $1.3 billion in restitution. Maryland prison officials caught a curious prison note while going about their rounds. It was an intercepted note from Kevin Merrill dedicated to his wife. It wasn't just any old love note. Instead, it had instructed her to hide their valuable assets, anything that was particularly high in value, such as the good wine. He wanted her to hide all that she could before the officials got their hands on it. It was a direct contempt of court and a clear indication that he was trying to hide all his ill-gotten assets from his massive $400 million scam. Kevin couldn't have pulled off all his scamming without the expert assistance of Jay Ledford, a certified public accountant practicing in Texas. Merrill met Ledford in Dallas in 1999. At this time, Kevin was a salesman for a company in Baltimore that dealt with hospital equipment and medical practices. The friendship between the two professionals grew stronger as time progressed. After years of casino outings and sporting events, they found a common interest in defrauding consumer debt portfolio investors. Both Merrill and Ledford worked with lending and purchasing consumer debt, which made them ideal candidates for carrying out a lucrative Ponzi scheme that promised massive results on consumer debt portfolios. Kevin's skills as a salesman came in handy as he would reel investors in by making compelling false claims, getting them to pay millions of dollars into their Ponzi scheme. Ledford leveraged his craft as an accountant to create fake documents and ran a debt collection center that gave authority and credibility to Merrill's false promises. Due to this fraudulent framework, the two scammers easily won the trust of many innocent and hard-working Americans. In the beginning, both alleged scammers would reach out to investors and invite them to receive a great return on an investment opportunity in the form of consumer debt portfolios. Thanks to Ledford's fictitious tax return statements and false documents, Merrill would win the trust of even the most meticulous investors. Merrill's ability to induce investors led to him becoming the face of their fraudulent scheme. On the other hand, Ledford became responsible for falsifying operations and creating believable documents. Kevin conned his way into the hard-earned money of many innocent victims by ruthlessly pledging them a life of financial security and massive returns. They presented the concept of flipping, which made investors believe that they would purchase consumer debt portfolios with their money and sell them at a profitable price to other debt buyers. After taking the investors' money, Ledford unveiled that the conspirators used fake statements and documentation to falsely represent who they were doing business with, how much they paid for consumer debt portfolios, and how much they were selling it for. In some instances, the two con men wouldn't even spend a single penny on consumer debt profiles, and most of their money would pour into their luxury lifestyles and assets. Not to mention, they went above and beyond to mask their unlawful activities. Ledford created debt-buying companies that were mere imposters and even opened bank accounts in the name of those companies. This allowed him to present legitimate documentation of money transfers to the clients they were scamming. This wasn't all. Ledford also used fake portfolios, sales agreements, forged signatures, bank statements, false reports, and illegitimate merchant accounts to conceal the truth. The two main companies which Ledford put forth to carry out the scams were Riverwalk and DeVille. Both of the companies had collection centers. They often invite prospective target clients to visit the collection centers and elevate their credibility further. Merrill would state that the profits the investors made was through consumer debt portfolio flipping, when it was simply the circulating money from other investors. While the accused did partake in the buying and selling of debt, the majority of their revenue came from fraudulent activities. In December 2017, Ledford added another member to optimize his Ponzi scheme. Cameron Jezierski was a former employee and defendant of Ledford. Ledford appointed him the duty of managing debt collections from DeVille and Riverwalk. They also used Jezierski's analytical skills to forge documentation for their scam and disguise the actual markup price charged to investors when buying debt portfolios. An FBI special agent at a joint news conference exposed details about uncovering the fraud, explaining that the authorities caught up to them thanks to a tip. Many investors are now coming to terms with the fact that they have been scammed. Since 2013, the fraud has ruined the lives of investors as their savings were funding extravagant lifestyles for the three scammers. These luxuries include an array of cars and high-end jewelry. Real estate was definitely a place where the money went. Their ill-gotten gains also went to private clubs and casinos. The Department of Justice came forward with their charges in the federal court of Maryland for Merrill, Ledford, and Jezierski. Charges against the three men included conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Their fraud became more apparent to the authorities after consumer debt became the year's securitized investment driver. The concerns about their scams became even more alarming after the Riverwalk financial debt collection victims started to file complaints against the company. Victims have lodged about 330 complaints against the Riverwalk financial debt collection business. Most complaints against the company are related to wire fraud, forged documentation, and statements. The feds connected the dots after finding out about Ledford and Associates PLLC. Ledford's private accounting firm meant that he could easily create documentation to deceive victims into trusting him with their money. It took numerous complaints and deep digging from the feds to finally hold the fraudulent companies accountable in a court of law. According to the SEC's complaint, due to referrals, innocent investors were accused of fraud on many occasions without involvement. The security offerings of the con artists trio rounded to $1.5 million, which sparked suspicion among the authorities. In court, Merrill's eyes became watery after he stood in front of all the innocent people he had conned. He admitted to misusing the trust of innocent people for his personal monetary gain and pledged to repay all the people he had exploited. Authorities found Merrill evacuating buckets worth of cash from his vacation home, amounting to $11 million at that time. Federal investigators were sure to snatch their leisurely and extravagant lifestyle right from their fingertips. This wealthy lifestyle became evident as federal officers started scooping through all their assets, belongings, and real estate. When making the arrest, agents conducted a raid at the couple's residence in Towson. Among the many assets the federal agents seized during this raid, some of the wealth included a pricey watch collection, over $5 million in cash, a car collection, and more. Kevin also had to give up $30 million due to the indictment. Along with this amount, he also had to forfeit 25 luxury cars, a boat, an insurance policy, aircraft interest, expensive jewelry, and other assets. When Kevin was serving jail time and awaiting sentence, his wife Amanda redeemed her husband's American Express card. Upon redeeming the card, frozen by the government, $26,075 in the form of gift cards from retail businesses such as Home Depot, Target, Starbucks, Sephora, and Nordstrom. The house raid also allowed the FBI agents to confiscate $15,378 cash from Amanda's purse and closet drawer. The government sold Merrill's mansions, exotic sports cars, and yachts to repay the investors. The culprits raised around $345 million by scamming individual investors, feeder funds, small business owners, and professionals. They used this money to live lavishly, transferring money to private banks and spending on some of the priciest items. For instance, some of their purchases included a Ferrari worth around $4 million, a 7-carat diamond ring, a diamond bracelet, and millions of casinos. Merrill also purchased properties in Florida and had a handsome amount of club memberships. Most of these purchases came from the money of investors that had fallen for the Ponzi scheme. Prosecutors also say he blew a figure of nearly $8 million in 5 years on Louis Vuitton collection by defrauding investors across the country. Ledford, on the other hand, burnt most of the scam cash on his toxic gambling addiction. He used a whopping $42 million to fulfill his gambling desires across the country. When indulging in gambling activities at casinos, Ledford would generally present a cashier's check, which he would convert into the form of playable chips. By the end of his gambling ventures inside the casino, if Ledford won, the casino would give him his winnings in the form of a check or cash. After giving him the money, the casino returned the cashier's check to Ledford. When Ledford lost during his casino roundup, the casino would use the front money to cover all of his losses and pay him the difference. It was estimated that Ledford returned about $18 million in checks and casino wires. Reports on currency transaction also show evidence of Ledford's gambling addiction and how he used the Ponzi scheme money for his habits. Casino records show that Ledford suffered a net loss of over $14 million in 6 years. He would use the investors' money to go on gambling trips and lost an incredible amount. In one particular gambling trip, Ledford lost about $1.5 million. Kevin Merrill and other heartless scammers stole from honest and hardworking people. Some even invested their lifelong earnings into the fraudulent companies in hopes of a better future for their loved ones. One such example is John Paradise, who drove all the way from New Jersey to attend the court proceedings. He told the court that all of his life savings were gone. Scammed out of $250,000 he had saved to send his daughters to college. He explained how his current circumstances were negatively affecting his mental and physical health. John Paradise addressed his feelings to Kevin Merrill in court, saying that he'll have a completely clear conscience when he steps out of court today. He goes on to say that Merrill's memory will be flushed away and he'll continue to find goodness in people despite the price he had to pay. This statement in the court trial was incredibly impactful. The judge compared Merrill with Bernie Madoff during the trial, deeming Madoff the better con artist of the two. Despite scamming a much higher amount, Bernie Madoff had the integrity to come out and confess his actions. On the other hand, Kevin Merrill kept drawing innocent investors towards his Ponzi scheme until he was caught. The 6-year-long Ponzi scheme, which raised about $396 million and funded luxurious lifestyles, was fortunately halted for 400 victims worldwide. Kevin B. Merrill faced a sentence of 22 years in prison. Kevin's wife also faced house arrest for trying to hide assets and recover damages. The trio used the expertise of fraud associates and leveraged forgery and fake documentation to easily convince investors. This fraud was enormous, and it took a long time for the government to crunch the numbers. Wire fraud and conspiracy were two outstanding and dominant charges against Kevin Merrill. Part of his plea deal involved admitting to his fraud in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. Investors looking for a 20% return were left stranded. The scheme was sophisticated, ruthless, and cold-hearted. It was recorded that Merrill, along with his 2 associates, orchestrated meticulous schemes which accounted for nearly $400 million.
Scientologist David Gentile and his partners had raised an incredible $1.8 billion from 17,000 investors. investors. And from this money, they went ahead and took a whopping $216 million worth of hidden fees. Fees that went right into lining Gentile and his partners' pockets. The money from investors funded a completely decadent lifestyle that included exotic cars, private jets, and lavish parties. For example, Gentile had a $30,000 50th birthday dinner that was paid for by investors. In a much worse example, Gentile bought a brand new 2015 Ferrari FF that cost $355,000. And yes, he put that on the books for investors to pay. Jeffrey Schneider was the second in command. The two con men built their lifestyle full of mansions, luxury cars, and private jets on the backs of innocent hard earners and honest businesses. 17,000 investors put in their money in their phony equity firm in hopes of an 8% return on investment. Instead, they ended up blowing investors' money. It wasn't just a two-person job. The involvement of Jeffrey Lash also filled a key role in making the scam a success. Each individual had a part to play, even though one may have a more predominant role than the other. David Gentile was charged with the most sentences, a resident in Manhasset, New York, and the CEO of GPB Capital. He made all the important decisions for the company to keep the scam funds rolling. Before forming this Ponzi, Gentile was a licensed public accountant at an accounting firm. He leveraged his skills and experience to grow the Ponzi scheme into a billion-dollar venture. Jeffrey Schneider from Austin, Texas, held 4 licenses from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. He facilitated the scam by masking it behind legitimate documentation and licenses. He was also CEO of Ascendant, a company that partnered with GPB Capital, the phony private equity fund company. He knew his way around working a business. The GPB Capital firm promised its investors 8% return on investment by securing their money into car dealerships. Jeffrey Lash, a GPB Capital managing partner and a Naples, Florida resident, was supervising their investments in car dealerships. All 3 of these Ponzi scam defendants, along with other perpetrators, were involved in defrauding investors through omissions and material misrepresentations. According to the Scientology Money Project, the private equity's formation started in 2007 when Jeffrey Schneider and David Gentile met for the first time, and things began to escalate. Around the period of 2002 and 2012, DOR Biopharma, a major pharma company, saw a future in CPB Holdings. This set the stage for David Gentile, Jeffrey Schneider, and Jeffrey Lash to come together and start one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in the country. Gentile used Jeffrey Lash's firm to contact brokers and create a false narrative behind the GPB funds, convincing brokers to tell their clients to invest in the private equity firm. They promised 8% in returns as they were putting the money in cash-flowing investments in mostly car dealerships and real estate. Of course, that was far from the truth. They held due diligence meetings and private dinners with investors, telling them how they use funds to invest in lucrative portfolio companies that generate consistent cash flow. The profits accumulated from these investments were to be distributed among the many investors sending the funds, or at least they were led to believe. But there simply weren't any profits. They were also told that their payments wouldn't undermine the invested capital. The dream set in front of misleading investors was that they could liquidate their invested capital for an incredible return or choose to receive monthly distributions as a source of passive income. Initially, the GBP funds raised capital with the help of Ascendant, Jeffrey Lash's company. The company employed workers whose only job was calling brokers and investment advisors, telling them to sell GPB funds to their clients and how their clients could benefit from the investment. Ascendant was also responsible for organizing events and seminars which glorified the fraudulent GPB funds. This collaboration between GPB funds and Ascendant was the fuel that powered a meticulously devised scam, one that raised over $1 billion. David Gentile and Jeffrey Schneider worked together to make the operations and marketing of GPB funds more developed and legitimate. In contrast, Jeffrey Lash made sure to only push GPB funds to RIA and brokers by the marketers working at Ascendant. Even though they did invest some of the funds in automotive portfolios and holdings, they misrepresented the amount of money these companies were making. They simply were cooking the books, and the companies weren't creating the cash flow that was shown to investors. Just like any other Ponzi scheme, they gave old investors with promised returns from new investors' money. And of course, they siphoned off the rest of the money with hidden costs for their own personal luxuries. The GPB fund started to show its true colors when massive shortfalls began happening as more and more people started withdrawing their investments. Employees at GPB GPB regularly sent emails to the owners, which depicted the huge margins between how much they received and how much they were paying out in distributions. It was only a matter of time before everything hit the fan. Internal conversations between the three shareholders discussed the massive shortfalls in the GPB funds. This made it obvious that the holding companies were losing money and investor funds were being seriously misappropriated. In an article by Reuters Intelligence, a leaked FBI intelligence report showed concerns about money laundering risks involving private equity firms. In further reports by the Scientology Money Project, David Gentile and Jeffrey Schneider had previous ties with Russian investors due to their interest in DOR Biopharma. This company had a chain of ownership linked to Russian mobsters. Overall, evidence suggests that the reports of a Russian investment of $100 million involved GPB Capital Holdings. The FBI has shared details explaining why this particular equity firm would be involved in money laundering. One pertains to the company's location in Delaware and Cayman Islands. Companies in these areas confide in bank secrecy laws, which allows them to hide their transactional practices. It's important to note that DOR Biopharma's major stakeholder, Michael Chernea, was responsible for kickstarting GPB Capital, providing David Gentile with its first portfolio asset. Michael Chernea's connection to foreign criminals, mafia, and Russian elites is well known and documented. He also can't enter the U.S. His two daughters reside in Florida, enjoying millions of dollars from him. With the siphoned money of honest workers, these three scammers enjoyed millions in scammings. David Gentile wasn't shy using investors' money. Remember the previously mentioned Ferrari at the beginning of the video? In November 2014, at one of the dealerships that was supposed to be a company that generated lots of money for investors, Gentile bought that new 2015 Ferrari FF for $355,000. His Ferrari was never transferred into his name, and this was intentional. Instead, with Gentile driving it, the Ferrari stayed on the books of the company. Even in internal company emails, employees occasionally discussed whether Gentile would finally pay for the car. He never did. But finally, in 2017, GPB sold the car to someone else for $172,000. Needless to say, investors in the fund took the loss. If you're following along doing the math, that was a $183,000 loss that the holding company officially took. They also used investor money to make leisurely trips on private jets worldwide. Investigators also found an American Express bill titled David's 50th Birthday, priced at around $30,000, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video. Thanks to this Ponzi, the car David Gentile purchased ranged over $2 million to give you a scale of their spending power. Amongst all the other outrageous spending, GPB also spent the fund money on private jet costs, including flight attendant services costing around $90,000 a year. This wasn't all. David Gentile was ticking boxes off the luxury checklist. He didn't stop at the private jets. He also bought super yachts from John Staluppi, the same car dealer who got him the private jet. Gentile and his partners weren't the only Scientologists to scam a giant amount of money. Reed Slatkin was another Scientologist scammer, just like them. His Ponzi scheme was actually the biggest scam ever at the time. From 1986 to 2001, Slatkin raised approximately $593 million from about 800 wealthy investors. Slatkin created and operated an informal investment club where investors simply gave him money to take care of. Most of Slatkin's early investors were his fellow Scientologists, and he soon had roughly $7 million under management. Slatkin did use the money to buy and sell stocks, but in the quarterly statements he mailed out, Slatkin misrepresented returns to his investors as being 25%. This brought in more investors. He simply was paying old investors with new investors' money. But in 1993, he made a $75,000 investment in a tech startup called Earthlink, which was founded and owned by fellow Scientologist Sky Dayton. Earthlink was an incredible success and turned Slayton's $75,000 investment into $100 million. This made Slayton look like a genius investor, and his fund got even more investor money from that point. Slayton's downfall began from there, as his later investments and lifestyle slowly drained investor funds. Eventually, the FBI uncovered Slayton's Ponzi scheme. The Church of Scientology fought to try to keep the millions they got from Slayton in donations, but they eventually gave back $3.5 million in ill-gotten gains. This begs the question whether the feds will go after the church as well, after dealing with Gentile and his partners. These were a couple of the biggest Ponzi schemes ever, and both are associated with the Church of Scientology. According to the SEC complaint, New York Attorney General Letitia James filed charges that require the scam artist to pay $700 million in restitution. Lash's lawyer told clients that he wouldn't plead guilty. It's difficult to investigate Ponzi scams where a fraudulent motive shadows an underlying layer of legitimacy. Gentile, Schneider, and Lash are still waiting for their day in court.
In 2017, Inigo Philbrick was on his way into Berlin on a private jet to meet a client. He was there to meet Daniel Tumpel to discuss selling a $2.3 million work of art called The Mirror Room by renowned Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama. When he landed, Inigo met up with Tumpel in a limousine and partied all over the city. When they finally did talk business, Inigo agreed to take the Mirror Room back to Miami and hang it in his gallery. Then he'd sell it and send the money back to Tumpel. A simple enough process. However, he strung along Tumpel for 10 months. In reality, he'd already sold the painting and pocketed the cash. Tumpel grew suspicious. Tumpel and his wife wanted to know the status of their other piece of art he had with them called Untitled 2010, which was worth just over $4.8 million at the time. The Tumpels wanted to know if it was safe in Inigo's hands. He sent them a picture straight out of a hostage situation showing him, the painting, and a copy of the morning newspaper. The only problem? Inigo photoshopped the painting in the picture. In reality, Philbrick used Untitled 2010 along with 4 other paintings as collateral to apply for a $15 million loan. Inigo rose to fame by selling high-priced art for his clients. Art dealers are like real estate agents for expensive art. The owner gets most of the money and the dealer takes a cut. At the time, Inigo had a piece of art for sale called Untitled. That came with a $5.5 million price tag. This isn't the same artwork that had been owned by the Tumpels. To pad his pockets, Inigo sold multiple percentages of the art to several different people. It would be like selling a home, but you sell the kitchen to buyer 1, the bedroom to buyer 2, the bathroom to buyer 3, and the rec room to buyer 4. Sometimes he'd sell more than 100% ownership of the painting. In the end, Inigo received around $10 million in total for the Untitled piece. The owner of Untitled believed himself to be the sole owner of the painting. So you can understand why he was confused when other people came forward looking for their cut of the auction money. While the Untitled scam wasn't Philbrick's first scam, it marked the beginning of the end. His investors knew they'd been duped, so they filed lawsuit after lawsuit looking for the money they believed was rightfully theirs. As more and more of Inigo's scams came to light, the pressure finally popped. Inigo broke down and confessed to 2 clients about what he'd done. He even knew he was going to get caught. In the end, he made off with $86 million worth of loans and investor cash. Money he spent living a lavish life of parties, travel, and deception. Inigo wasn't born a scammer. He was a graduate of the same school his father attended, Goldsmith University of London, a well-respected school that focused on art education. After graduation, Inigo became pretty well respected. He landed an internship with the owner of the esteemed White Cube Art Gallery and worked under the mentorship of Jay Joplin. Success came quickly for a young Inigo. By 2013, he opened his own contemporary art gallery and became a regular face at large art auctions across the US and UK. Many considered him a bona fide art expert, and his gallery grossed over $130 million in 2017. That same year, he opened another branch of his gallery in Miami, Florida. However, Inigo's rise to fame didn't come without some strange habits. Every morning in the shower, he'd shout his own name over and over again to pump himself up for the day. He even had a sweatshirt with his name printed across it 3 times. From an early state, it was clear that Inigo saw himself in a different kind of light. He had big dreams and bigger aspirations. However, as is often true of the overambitious, those aspirations led to his inevitable downfall. While he started legit, it wasn't long before Inigo got a taste for the high-flying world of multi-million-dollar art dealing. His rising success put him in social circles with other wealthy and high-status individuals, including his reality TV girlfriend, Victoria Baker Harbor. When the two met through mutual friends in 2016, Inigo was actually dating someone else, a fellow art dealer, Francisca Mancini, who had just given birth to Inigo's daughter. However, the connection between him and Victoria was undeniable. In fact, Victoria even nicknamed him Fruit after the forbidden nature of their love. His new love was quite wealthy herself. She loved fashion and yachts, and her own career was nothing short of flashy. Victoria starred on a reality TV show called Made in Chelsea that follows the lives of rich young people in the West London area. She and Inigo split most of their time between London and New York, flying in private planes, dining at fancy restaurants, and partying until the sun came up. According to New York Magazine, Inigo even kept a healthy stash of MDMA on hand, a psychedelic substance. Though successful, Inigo wasn't making enough to maintain his lavish lifestyle. Driven by greed and the need to keep up appearances, Inigo turned to scamming. He would resell the same piece of art over and over to multiple people, promising them that they would make a profit once he sold it at auction. Sometimes he would split the worth of an artwork into percentages and sell more than 100% worth of ownership to its buyers. Some clients would already own expensive art and come to Inigo for his help in listing and selling it. Instead, Inigo would apply for multi-million-dollar loans with their art as the collateral. Now that he was swimming in cash, Inigo could afford lavish luxuries like $50,000 watches, $5,000 suits, and custom-made shoes. He proposed to Victoria in a private villa on Ibiza, a luxury Spanish island in the Mediterranean. Inigo even kept a house account open at Cipriani, a pricey and well-known Italian restaurant in London. Kenny Schachter is an American artist, writer, and all-around academic. However, he wasn't wise enough to notice a scam when he saw one. He and Inigo were good friends, close friends even. Still, our art-dealing con man scammed Kenny out of $1.5 million. However, Kenny was quite the character himself, as learned in his tell-all write-up about their relationship in New York Magazine. The two met in 2012, when Inigo was an up-and-coming 25-year-old Justin Timberlake look-alike kid from London. He was sharp, fun, and funny, drawing Kenny in like a fish on a line. They drank expensive wine, ate expensive sushi, and traveled the world together on private jets. However, the most important characteristic they shared was their mutual love of all things art. Their relationship wasn't for nothing either. Like most scammers, Inigo helped Kenny make a little bit of money before ripping him off. He knew he had to gain his victims' trust before he gouged them for all they're worth. He helped Kenny flip an $800,000 Christopher Wool for a few $100,000. All the while, Kenny had no idea what Inigo was doing outside of their relationship. He even wrote a positive review about Inigo for ArtNet News. 6 months later, Kenny finally opened his eyes. All the red flags lined up. He recalled rampant use of illegal narcotics and times when Inigo took Kenny's kids out to Ibiza for 3-day benders. Kenny remembered how Inigo casually carried his illegal pills through airports without a care in the world. The risk seemed impressive at the time, but when you're scamming the art world for $86 million, petty possession doesn't seem all that scary. While in Ibiza, Inigo played $100,000 hands of drunken backgammon, keeping Kenny out until almost 9 in the morning. In fact, Kenny would have to sneak in through his bedroom window since his wife locked him out of the house. Maybe if Kenny didn't let the facade Inigo called his life cloud his judgment, he'd have realized he'd been taken for thousands, if not millions of dollars. Remember that $15 million loan Philbrook took out? He defaulted on $14 million worth of that loan in 2019, which officially put a massive target on Inigo's back. With $14 million in loans hanging over his head and a mountain of lawsuits bearing his name, Inigo and a pregnant Victoria fled to the Pacific island of Vanuatu, also known as a sunny place for shady people. It's a tax haven that criminals regularly use to hide illicit funds from the government and escape authorities. They rented out a run-down boathouse, but did little to hide their identities. Remember, Victoria was a well-known reality TV star, and Inigo was the high-flying art dealer on the run from the FBI. He even booked tennis lessons under his own name, got coffee from the same shop every morning, and started rescuing stray dogs. Still, one of their neighbors in Vanuatu described him as considerate and kind. Inigo and Victoria flew under the radar for 6 months before the feds finally caught up with them. In June of 2020, while walking through the street markets on the island, local police pulled up beside them and threw Inigo in the back of a cop car. Victoria begged begged officers to let her go with her Inigo, so they tossed her in a separate car. Police drove the pair to the airport, where a Gulfstream jet waited to take them back to the U.S., perhaps the last private jet he'd ever fly on. Inigo's trial began as soon as they landed back in the States. The prosecution showed that his schemes also included inflating the value of artwork with falsified documents, and one contract even listed a stolen identity as the seller. These schemes, paired with his technique of overselling ownership percentages, were all meant to fund his lavish lifestyle. When the judge asked him why he committed these crimes, Inigo told the truth for the first time in a long time. It was for the money, Your Honor. Inigo left the trail of betrayed friends, business partners, and investors in his wake. Many of them trusted Inigo. He stabbed them in the back for personal gain. His friends, turned victims, don't feel sorry for him at all. In fact, they think he deserves what he gets. While her husband awaited sentencing, Victoria returned to filming her reality TV show. This time, she had a newborn daughter named Gaia Grace to show off. On the first episode of the most current season, she said she couldn't wait to get through this and have her little family back together. She also wrote a statement to present to the court and said that the trauma and shock felt like death. She wrote that she was desperately lonely and questioned if she would be able to carry on. She tells the court that she can't function without Inigo and begged them to treat him with leniency. Inigo ultimately pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and was ordered to serve 7 years in prison and forfeit over $86 million worth of stolen funds. Meanwhile, everything was laughs and jokes on Made in Chelsea as Victoria joked about visiting Inigo in jail. She said he looked good in khaki and that orange wasn't really his color. Meanwhile, during the pandemic, Inigo contracted COVID twice while in prison and complained that the inmates were only fed peanut butter sandwiches and lunch meat for weeks due to the lockdowns. Sharon Fletcher, the executive director of the International Foundation for Art Research, learned of Inigo's case and said that fortunately, scams like this don't happen that often. When they do, they expose the soft underbelly of an art world where large sums of money are transferred with little transparency. Inigo's story shows what happens when trust is misplaced and people of seemingly good backgrounds turn out to be dishonest. Here are a few of the greediest scammers. Number 3, Australian tax fraud. Anthony Dixon and Michael Isakidis learned that lesson the hard way. These business partners secretly operated one of the largest tax fraud schemes in Australian history for 6 years. By the time authorities caught up with them, they'd avoided paying nearly $135 million in taxes. But how is it possible for these millionaire fraudsters to pull off such a large-scale heist? And how did they go undetected by the government for so many years? In the secret world of corporate crime, the answer is a complex web of bogus companies, fake identities, and offshore bank accounts. On March 9th, 2006, Dixon and Isakidis created a company called Numetics Health Australasia. Using this company, the two sought out inventors with ideas for new medical products and offered these inventors thousands of dollars in funding for clinical trials. But there's a catch. If they wanted the money, the inventors had to give away their intellectual property rights to another company called Athena. Why? Because Athena, an offshore company based in the Cayman Islands, was also owned by Dixon and Isakidis. After an inventor signed the rights away to Athena, the scammers then sold the rights to Numetics, aka themselves, for a price way over its true value. Then Dixon and Isakidis fired the inventor whose idea they bought, allowing the pair to claim they suffered millions of dollars in losses on medical ideas that hadn't worked out. But what was the point of fabricating all those fake losses? As it turned out, Numetics was also used as a legitimate business by Dixon and Isakidis. The company earned hundreds of millions of dollars each year through various buying and leasing agreements. Normally, all that income would be subject to taxation. By using their fake losses from the failed medical ideas, Dixon and Isakidis claimed they were making much less money than they actually were. They kept $450 million hidden from the government, allowing them to dodge $135 million in taxes. With all that extra money, these two fraudsters lived in the kind of luxury most of us only dream about. Dixon purchased a waterfront mansion for $4.6 million and lived there with his third wife, 28-year-old Slovakian woman named Dagmar Maxianova. Meanwhile, Isakidis bought a $3.8 million waterfront property where he lived with his wife, Donreka. Both men also spent lavishly on cars, yachts, and other properties. Dixon bought a $1.1 million Rolls-Royce Phantom and Rolls-Royce Ghost engraved with custom license plates, a $1 million Riviera sports yacht, and a $10 million shopping center. Isakidis used his money to buy a Bentley, a Rolls-Royce, private jet rides, and luxurious vacations with his wife. Greed always catches up with you eventually. Authorities noticed the unusual nature of Numedix's finances, and eventually, the Australian Taxation Office launched an official review. After that, the tax fraud scam went up in flames. In May of 2012, the two men were arrested and charged with tax fraud and money laundering. Both men were found guilty. Isakidis was sentenced to 10 years in jail in 2018, while Dixon was sentenced to 14 in 2015. Meanwhile, as her husband waited out his time in jail, Donreka Isakidis didn't want to move out of her $3.8 million mansion, despite the home being legally forfeited to the Australian government after Isakidis landed in jail. In December of 2020, the government filed an action to evict the fraudster's wife from the house so that they could seize the property and auction it off. Mrs. Isakidis tried to fight the government's effort, but was eventually kicked out in July of 2021. Number 2. The bushfire. The worst scammers steal from people in need, especially during Australian bushfires and the COVID pandemic. Tiffany Ann Brislin Brown is that kind of scammer. Between 2019 and 2020, Australia experienced a period of severe bushfires that burnt an estimated 60 to 84 million acres of land. While bushfires aren't uncommon in Australia, this particular outbreak was terrible regarding its intensity and duration, eventually leading to the destruction of over 5,900 buildings, 34 casualties. Couple this situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, which broke out in early 2020, and things weren't great for many Australian families and businesses. To help combat some of this economic insecurity, the Aussie government established a program where struggling small businesses could apply for and receive money from the government, similar to the PPP loans in the US. While the program legitimately helped many needy Australians, some saw the money as a means to enrich themselves and cheat the system. Brislin Brown was then a 23-year-old woman who lived in the city of Newcastle in New South Wales, Australia. For 2 months, Brislin Brown shamelessly used this bushfire relief program to scam the government out of $60,000. To get the money, she falsely claimed she owned several struggling small businesses and applied for 24 separate program grants using a variety of bank accounts and phone numbers to cover her tracks. Eventually, the police caught up with Miss Brown, but it wasn't her scam that made her go viral, rather her mugshot. When Newcastle police issued a warrant for her arrest, they also posted a notice on Facebook hoping that someone could locate Brislin Brown. In the post, the police included a 2015 mugshot of Brown with a confused look on her face, messy hair, and a tattoo on her collarbone that reads, "We don't remember days, we remember moments." Clearly, this wasn't Brislin Brown's first run-in with the law. In 2015, she got arrested for an unknown charge, leading to the mugshot that, 5 years later, caused quite the stir. The unflattering mugshot led to jokes about her messy appearance all over social media. This eventually led Brown to post her own comment while a warrant was out for her arrest, which read, quote, "Loving the photo taken how many years ago? Let's calm down on the comments, guys. It's not every day I look like trailer trash. Let's just say it wasn't a good angle, shall we?" The police then fired back with their own comment, quote, "Probably time you walk into a police station before we find you." Brislin Brown also felt the need to post a more flattering picture of herself to her personal Facebook page, captioning it, "Here's an actual pic of me. Let's take the time to acknowledge this is not my current Newcastle police page photo." Unflattering mugshots aside, Brislin Brown still had to pay the piper. She eventually pled guilty to 6 counts of dishonestly obtaining a financial advantage in September of 2020. She was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail, becoming the first person in Australia to be jailed over bushfire relief fraud. She was also ordered to pay back the $60,000 she scammed from the program. Number 1. Way of life. On the surface, Jade Killen was your average family-devoted suburban mother. She was a 33-year-old mother of 3 living in Unanderra, a family-friendly suburb outside of the city, of Wollongong. However, her home life wasn't completely normal, as her husband was in jail for armed robbery. Still, on social media and in real life, Killen effortlessly played the part of your typical caring mother of three. But underneath that bright, cheery exterior was a darker side. The truth was, Killen made her living running a high-end identity theft operation, all from the comfort of her home. So, how did she do it? Killen ran a complex operation. Throughout her criminal career, Killen stole the identities of 786 people and used their information for her own enrichment. She applied for loans and lines of credit in her victims' names to buy and resell the latest Apple products. Police say she used her stolen identities to receive tens of thousands of dollars worth of loans she applied for with stolen identities. When police searched her home, they found bank cards with different names, blank driver's licenses, and 14 databases with the private information of countless Australians. Killen was extremely devoted to her life of crime too. On a mirror in her home, she wrote an incriminating phrase in red lipstick saying, quote, "Fraud is not a crime, it's a way of life." Police also actually found a daily schedule for her criminal activities written above her bed. The schedule included reminders such as apply for 5 loans using different names, complete any research on new companies and credit options for Sunday, and place 5 orders with different names with all carriers for Tuesday. Apparently, devoting yourself to a life of crime means having to work on the weekends. Just how dumb can criminals get with keeping evidence around? Sadly, many of her victims were blind to Killen's scam. One such victim was a man named Zach Aarons. Killen attempted to use Aarons' personal information to take out a $40,000 loan in his name from a lending company called Now Finance. Luckily for Aarons, Now Finance asked Killen for more identification before they gave out the loan, a request which led Killen to withdraw her application. Still, it wasn't all good news for Aarons. He wasn't aware that his personal information was compromised until he got a phone call from the Lake Illawarra police. Aarons' credit report also took a nosedive, and he's had difficulty taking out loans, real loans that he needs to buy property. So how did Killen's complicated identity theft operation finally get busted? 2 main incidents led to her downfall. The first occurred when Killen used a fake medical certificate to get out of community service she'd been assigned after being charged with drug possession. Staff at the corrections office noticed that the certificate looked odd and alerted the police. But the final nail in the coffin for Killen came after she attempted to buy an elaborate card printer that was worth $11,000. Normally, these printers were for banks and government offices, but Killen told the printer company she needed the machine for a local bowling club. Suspicious of the order, a representative from the printer company called the bowling club and discovered that no one named Killen even worked there. The company then notified the police, who tracked Killen down because she used her real address to place the printer order. Killen was arrested and pleaded guilty to 33 charges of fraud and dishonesty. While this wasn't how Killen imagined her story would end, she ultimately got to be closer to her husband, behind bars. In May 2022, James Stunt, socialite and ex-husband of Formula One heiress Petra Ecclestone, was one of 8 people charged with money laundering in a massive scheme that laundered millions through Bradford Jewelers. 40-year-old Stunt made his millions by partnering with the Bradford gold dealer Fowler Oldfield to launder £266 million between 2014 and 2016. They moved the cash in sports bags and luggage, using it to buy large amounts of gold from 2 vendors in Birmingham, UK. James Stunt did whatever he could in order to maintain and preserve his lavish lifestyle. Let's face it, if he actually had any real skill sets, he wouldn't have needed to resort to scamming. And if scamming, large-scale money laundering, or tax evasion isn't exactly your thing, then our friends at Skillshare can help. They're today's sponsor for this video, and they can help teach you real-world and practical skills. They offer hundreds of online classes in fields such as animation, film, writing, photography, and much more. Whether you're looking to make more money from some new skills, be able to work free wherever you want, whenever you want, or become indispensable at your current job, Skillshare arms you with all the education you need to upgrade your life. A couple of us here at Pablito's Way even enrolled in some classes ourselves. I particularly enjoyed one of the advanced video editing classes that Skillshare offers. This particular class was in video format and broken into 15 different lessons, which made it easy to do from home or on the go via phone or tablet. The lessons themselves were thorough, engaging, and easy to digest. In the end, I was able to pick up a number of invaluable skills that helped streamline our editing process and improve the overall look and feel of the channel. So, if you want to learn from the best, join Skillshare's growing community of creatives and innovators and start investing in your personal growth. The first 1,000 people to sign up through our link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Let's get back to the video, because they were moving so much money. The staff at their bank grew suspicious and alerted the police, who quickly launched an investigation. Stunt's company, aptly named Stunt & Company, also received some of this cash in the amount of £46 million. Conveniently, one of Fowler Oldfield's directors became a vice president at Staten & Company and made the scheme go national. Stunt & Company is classified as a gold bullion business, which means it purchased and sold gold from its reserves for a profit. Part of Stunt & Company's scam started by selling silver and telling people it was gold. It might be easy to blame Stunt, but he's not the only one. There are 8 defendants in this case, and most of them worked at Fowler Oldfield. Stunt, who walked out of the courtroom with a middle finger raised to the crowd, spent years trying to seem mysterious. He always wore a slight smirk on his face, which looked like he was hiding some big secrets. He was chauffeured around the West End in a massive array of blacked-out cars led by security guards in black suits and earpieces. He had 2 Rolls-Royces, 2 Range Rovers, and a Lamborghini. He drove them around town and left them outside while he went to Sotheby's to purchase near-priceless pieces of artwork. He had some quirky habits as well. Stunt always carries an Evian water bottle containing water, lemon, cayenne pepper, and maple syrup. Someone asked why he always brings his own water. He said it was because someone might poison him. He wears pale foundation, mascara, and lip gloss, which he continued to don in his court proceedings, paired with a shiny suit. Part of his mystery came from the fact that he became a multi-billionaire in his mid-30s, and no one knew where all of this money came from. Stunt tried to come off as a James Bond-style classy businessman, but that doesn't line up with his behavior behind closed doors. Stunt's trial for money laundering was scheduled just after the demise of his marriage to billionaire heiress Petra Ecclestone. Ecclestone was born in Westminster, London, England, as the youngest daughter of the English Formula One billionaire Bernie Ecclestone. Bernie is the former chief executive of the Formula One Group, which manages Formula One racing and partially owns Delta Topco. Bernie was responsible for selling television rights for Formula One racing and managing the Formula One Grand Prix, both of which earned him a fortune. He quickly became one of the wealthiest men in the UK with a net worth of $3.3 billion. At 14, Ecclestone contracted viral meningitis, an internal virus that can cause fever, headache, nausea, vomiting, lack of appetite, fatigue, irritability, and much more. The symptoms can get quite severe. Ecclestone was hospitalized for the illness and apparently came close to passing away. She says the experience completely changed her life. She became a self-proclaimed health freak and a hypochondriac after recovering. She later became an ambassador for the Meningitis Trust. Ecclestone grew into a successful woman in her own right, apart from her father's massive fortune. At 19 years old, she leveraged her presence in the public eye to create a menswear brand called Form, which is sold in the popular UK retail store Harrods. However, the company shut down after just 14 months of operation. In 2009, she signed a contract with Croatian clothing company Sissia. In 2011, she released a line of accessories under the brand name Stark, including handbags with 24-karat gold detailing. Ecclestone has a net worth of $400 million. In 2006, Ecclestone went on a blind date with Stunt. They claimed it was a case of opposites attract, while friends and family predicted that their differences were too great for it to ever work out. He liked to live in mystery. Meanwhile, she was very public. His weight was always fluctuating. She was a health nut with a rigorous workout and diet routine. He allegedly battled addiction and chain-smoked cigarettes. She was sober. The one thing they had in common, though, was that they loved to flaunt their wealth. 5 years later, they got married. To no one's surprise, they had an extravagant $12 million wedding fit for a billionaire businessman and a millionaire heiress. Then, 22-year-old Ecclestone wore a Vera Wang wedding dress worth 80,000 pounds. She arrived at the wedding in a vintage Rolls-Royce driven by F1 driver John Alesi. She began her journey 30 miles away in Rome in a white Rolls-Royce Phantom and switched cars before arriving. They had a religious ceremony and flew in several members of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra to harmonize the nuptials. Several celebrities were in attendance, including Paris and Nikki Hilton, the Duchess of York, and her daughters. The lavish ceremony was held at the spectacular 15th century Odescalchi Castle in Italy, the same place where Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes got married years before. The following reception was full of toasts with vintage Cristal champagne, acrobatic shows, and fireworks. Andrea Bocelli serenaded them with his romantic hits Time to Say Goodbye, Somos Novios, and Can't Help Falling in Love. Eric Clapton sang to them for their first dance as man and wife. The Black Eyed Peas performed afterwards for a lofty fee of $1.5 million. The night concluded with another breathtaking fireworks show. The same year, they purchased the Manor Mansion, one of Los Angeles' biggest private homes. Also known as the Spelling Mansion, it was built in 1988 for television producer Aaron Spelling and his wife Candy. The exterior is made of imported limestones, and the interior is adorned with European fixtures and artwork. The Manor is a French-style chateau mansion with over 100 rooms, including 27 bathrooms and 14 bedrooms. At 56,500 square feet on 5 acres of land, it's bigger than the White House. There are koi ponds, a wine cellar, a citrus orchard, a bowling alley, multiple pools, and a barber shop. When it was first built, it included a screening room, gift wrapping room, flower cutting room, a tennis court, and an ice rink. It even had a room for Candy's prized doll collection and an entire wing dedicated to her wardrobe. There are 16 carports and a driveway that can hold over 100 vehicles. In 2006, Aaron passed away at home. In 2011, the widowed Candy put it on the market with an asking price of $150 million. Ecclestone bought it for $85 million, then did $20 million worth of upgrades. She removed chandeliers, wall lights, and fireplace mantles. It took a team of 500 workers 9 weeks to install her new furnishings. But the happy couple's relationship took a turn in the new home. Ecclestone realized Stunt's unhealthy spending habits and frequent violent rages. He spent more than £800,000 on Lamborghinis during their marriage. Many of his purchases were made with her money. In 2016, Ecclestone decided to sell the home for an astonishing $200 million. It was on and off the market for a few years before selling for $120 million to Canadian billionaire and Edmonton Oilers ice hockey team owner Darryl Katz. At the time, it was the highest priced sale of California real estate. In February 2022, the manor was put up for market again for $165 million. Over the first few years of their marriage, Ecclestone and Stunt had 3 children together, including a set of twins. But it wasn't a fairy tale romance. In 2017, Ecclestone reportedly locked herself in a bathroom during a violent fight with Stunt. In February 2017, Ecclestone moved out of the family's home with their 3 children. She filed for divorce shortly after. Ecclestone wanted to return to the house owned by her family's Bambino Trust. The judge ordered Stunt to move out immediately. Stunt stormed out of the courtroom and gave the middle finger to photographers on the way out. He drove off in a Rolls-Royce, daunting a vanity stunt-style license plate. As part of the hearing, the judge ordered the repossession of several of Stunt's luxury cars, including a Lamborghini with expensive golf clubs in the front seat. The couple signed a prenup worth £16 million before their marriage, including some of Stunt's assets like a wine collection worth millions of pounds. At the time of the court proceedings, the manor in Los Angeles was one of the assets being fought over, which was later awarded to Ecclestone. Their divorce was far from amicable. They continued to publicly attack each other in the media for years after. Stunt claimed that his wife changed entirely after their marriage. Meanwhile, Ecclestone claimed that her husband was addicted to illegal substances. After the marriage evaporated, Stunt's bank account suffered because he no longer had access to father-in-law Bernie's fortune. He declared bankruptcy in 2018 and his assets were frozen. Many of his million-dollar estates were repossessed. Stunt then claimed he was robbed of $126 million of cash and jewelry in the hopes of a payout. He also apparently lent forged artworks to the royal family. But after being married to the daughter of a multi-billionaire and living in the biggest home in Los Angeles, Stunt was more than used to a life of luxury. Desperate to maintain his billionaire lifestyle, Stunt resorted to the infamous money laundering scam that brought him back into court. Without much of his own wealth, Stunt persuaded his father-in-law to give him a $10 million guarantee to lease gold from a bank for a gold bar production operation. He doused 1 kilo of silver bars in glint to make them look like gold and sold them at the going rate for gold, which is much more valuable than silver. Since the money earned from this operation was illegal, Stunt started a money laundering scheme to make it look like his fortune was on the books and avoided paying taxes. As much as Stunt tried to deny allegations of money laundering, one video seemed to confirm it all. Leaked by The Independent, a short clip and photograph show the CCTV behind-the-scenes footage of Stunt's office in which 4 people can be seen standing at a circular table counting stacks of criminal cash. They are surrounded by piles of Scottish notes as they funnel them into a banknote counting machine. Prosecutors claimed the photo was taken at the Mayfair office for Stunt and Company in February 2016 and was sent by one of the 8 defendants to a coworker via WhatsApp. In the image, you can clearly see Stunt's older brother Lee seated in front of the counting machine. Unlike his younger brother, Lee was much more agreeable and approachable and lived a modest life with his wife. Lee was chief operating officer of Stunt and Company and was found deceased at his parents' home, the Wentworth Estate in Surrey. The cause was speculated to be an overdose, though no official reason has been released. Some believe that Lee took himself out with the knowledge that he and his brother's criminal enterprise was about to be uncovered. Sure enough, mere days after his death, police raided the offices of Stunt and Company. More CCTV footage brought before the court showed a man delivering a bag full of cash wrapped in black garbage bags. He took his hat off and used it to wipe the bags while 2 other men counted the money. They washed the money through Fowler Oldfield in Bedford, West Yorkshire, and apparently used the cash to buy gold. The scheme went national when Fowler Oldfield's director, Greg Frankel, became vice president of Stunt & Co. Stunt was living out of the country at the time, but insisted on a very hands-on approach. Several text exchanges between employees were shown to the court, many of which emphasized Stunt's desire to increase profits. Though not involved in the day-to-day management of Stunt & Co., he delegated much of his dirty work to others. In court, Stunt said he was unaware of what was happening within his company and played dumb by insisting he hadn't been keeping up with the emails that ultimately incriminated him. But his employees begged to differ. By the time the scheme was uncovered, more than £266 million had been washed through Fowler Oldfield. Nicholas Clark, the prosecutor in the case, ripped apart Stunt's mysterious persona, saying that he was nothing but a fake. While Stunt's website claimed he made his fortune through successful business ventures, nothing on his resume added up to the wealth he claimed to have. Clark pointed out the differences between Stunt's tax and business records. He said that if Stunt was the independent businessman he claimed to be, he wouldn't have needed Bernie Ecclestone's $10 million for his new gold bar business. Clark claimed that Stunt took advantage of his wife's wealth and connections to establish himself in the business world. Stunt claimed he had no knowledge of the issues reported by Stunt & Co.'s auditor and claimed the report was incompetent. Stunt defended himself by saying he wasn't in touch with the other defendants involved in the scheme. This included his childhood best friend Alex Tulloch, who had a background in private banking and was supposed to be making sure they weren't laundering any money. Stunt also claimed that he didn't find out until the police report how much money was being funneled through his company. But Clark said Stunt received direct profits from £50,000 to £250,000. He also cited multiple money transfers from Ecclestone's account into his, showing his dependence on her wealth. Stunt wrote checks and made charitable payments in massive amounts. Clearly, he didn't know how to live modestly. Clark also made allegations against Fowler Oldfield's accountant, Heidi Buckler, who knew of the large amounts of cash being delivered to Stunt's office. Several emails and messages were revealed that she was falsifying transactions to make the cash profits align with the weight of the gold, ensuring the money was laundered correctly. Clark made more claims against another defendant, Haroon Rashid, who was seen in CCTV footage delivering bags of cash to Stunt's office. He was listed as the director of Rashid Jewelers Limited, which had no apparent shop or workshop. Clark told the jury that Stunt & Co. was wiping down surfaces long before the pandemic, when there was only one reason to do so. Stunt claimed to take a very hands-off approach to the business, but text and email exchanges prove otherwise. 5 of the 8 defendants in the case, Greg Frankel, Daniel Rawson, Paul Miller, Heidi Buckler, and Haroon Rashid, said the prosecution couldn't prove that the cash was criminal property. The other 3 defendants, James Stunt, Alexander Tulloch, and Francesca Soda, said they didn't know whether the cash was illegal. All 8 denied charges of money money laundering. During the highly publicized divorce proceedings between Stunt and Ecclestone, Stunt insulted her entire family, including her wealthy father. He mouthed curse words and made a gun gesture towards Bernie, and even tried to punch him. Shortly after Lee's passing, Stunt's behavior took a turn for the worse. He behaved erratically inside and outside the courtroom, and was incredibly violent and abusive towards his wife. Bernie told the media that Stunt once tried to take his life. He apparently hated Stunt for quite some time, but avoided getting involved because he didn't want to damage his relationship with his daughter. Many of her friends rooted for their divorce for a while. In 2015, Stunt was involved in another court case when his former butler, Carl Hadjick, claimed that Stunt called him names and pushed him into a wall at the manor. Stunt denied the allegations, but this behavior is consistent with what Ecclestone's lawyers also said about his actions. Ecclestone's lawyer claimed that Stunt admitted to abusive behavior and several drug overdoses, which Stunt denied. The day after the judge ordered him out of the manor, photographers caught Stunt leaving in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce, smoking a cigarette and holding a porcelain cat with another in his lap. He was still wearing his wedding ring. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you feel the man has to make more money in a relationship.